When Keanu Reeves opened up, Joe Rogan couldn't stop listening. Studio lights were dim, but warm, giving the room a soft glow that made every sound feel more intimate. Joe Rogan leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Keanu Reeves, who sat across from him with a quiet, almost fragile calmness. Keanu's presence was powerful, yet his body language carried no weight of arrogance. Instead, he looked like a man who had walked through storms and still chose to smile at the rain. The audience listening expected a typical talk about movies, action scenes, and Hollywood stories. But within the first few minutes, something felt different. Joe could sense it. There was a silence in the room, a silence that seemed to belong to Keanu. "People see me as an actor," Keanu said softly, "but before all of this, I was just a boy searching for meaning." His voice was steady, but there was a heaviness that pulled listeners closer. Joe didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't a moment to rush. Keanu took a deep breath, as if reaching into memories that were both painful and beautiful. "When I was young, my family moved from place to place. There was no sense of stability. Sometimes, I didn't even know which school I'd be in the next month. I felt like a guest everywhere I went, never truly belonging anywhere." His words landed heavy, because everyone in the room had, at some point, felt that sense of not belonging. Then came a twist that no one expected so early. Keanu leaned back and looked at the ceiling as if replaying a scene in his mind. "My father left when I was 3. It wasn't just leaving, it was disappearing. One day he was there, and then he was gone. I grew up with that absence. It shaped me." Joe's eyes widened slightly. He had interviewed fighters, comedians, politicians, and scientists. But the raw vulnerability in Keanu's voice carried a different weight. "Did that make you angry?" Joe finally asked, his tone soft, almost careful. Keanu shook his head slowly. "At first, I didn't know what to feel. I was too young. But as I grew older, I realized anger would only chain me to him. So instead, I learned to carry silence. Silence became my friend. It taught me patience, it taught me to listen, and it taught me humility." The studio seemed frozen in that moment. Even the air felt still. Keanu's single quote's eyes softened as he continued. "I didn't have much money growing up. Sometimes, we struggled just to get by. But there was kindness in unexpected places. A neighbor who would share food, a teacher who believed in me when I doubted myself, a friend who lent me a book that changed how I saw the world. Those small acts became the foundation of who I am. They were reminders that no matter how broken life seems, kindness has the power to repair pieces of it." The emotional depth was gripping. Joe leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief at the honesty pouring out. "So many people chase fame, success, money," Joe said, "but you're telling me it's those quiet, simple moments that shaped you the most." Keanu smiled faintly, a smile touched with sadness and gratitude. "Fame didn't raise me. Kindness did. Resilience did. When you face hardship, you realize that strength isn't about fighting everyone. Strength is about refusing to let the darkness take away your light." The words struck like lightning. Joe's usual energetic style was replaced by stillness. He wasn't just hosting a show anymore. He was listening like a man hearing truth for the first time. And as the audience leaned closer to their screens, they too felt the pull of Keanu's story. It wasn't a Hollywood script. It was real life, raw and unpolished, filled with wounds, humility, and the unexpected beauty of resilience. But no one could have guessed that what Keanu was about to reveal next would shake the room even more deeply. The silence that shaped him. Joe Rogan leaned forward again, his face showing a rare seriousness. He could tell Keanu wasn't just sharing a story for entertainment. He was opening wounds that had never fully healed, wounds that carried lessons. The studio felt heavier, almost like everyone inside had stopped breathing just to catch every word. Keanu rested his hands on his knees, his fingers brushing against one another, a small nervous habit he didn't seem aware of. "There were nights," he said quietly, when my mother worked late, and I would sit by the window waiting. The streets outside were loud with voices and car horns, but inside our little home, there was nothing but silence. I would wait and wait, wondering if she was safe, wondering if she was tired, wondering if she was happy. I was a boy, but I carried questions far bigger than my age. His words touched something deep. People who had grown up without security, people who had waited for someone to come home, they knew that feeling. Joe nodded slowly. That kind of silence can break some people, but you, it seems like it shaped you differently. Keanu's eyes softened with memory. Yes, at first, it was loneliness. But then I learned to fill that silence with imagination. I would dream. I would picture myself in different worlds. Sometimes I would read. Sometimes I would just sit and create stories in my mind. I think that is where acting started for me, not on a stage, but in those silent nights where my mind became my escape. He paused, and for a moment, his lips trembled slightly, as if holding back emotion. But silence also carried pain. When I was a teenager, one of my closest friends died in an accident. He was young, full of dreams, full of laughter. Losing him left a hole in me. I remember standing at his funeral, surrounded by people crying, and I couldn't cry. Not a single tear. I just stood there in silence, asking myself why the world takes away the good ones so soon. That question never left me. It follows me even now. Joe exhaled deeply, his voice low. That must have changed the way you see life. Keanu nodded. It did. It taught me that every smile matters, because you never know when it will be the last. It taught me that being kind is not optional, it's necessary. And it taught me that loss will visit us all, but how we carry it decides who we become. The studio grew quieter, almost reverent. Keanu then leaned slightly closer to Joe, as if letting him in on a personal secret. Many people think strength is about winning fights or never showing weakness. But I've learned that real strength is the ability to keep your heart open, even when it has been broken again and again. I have lost people I loved. I have faced moments where I wanted to disappear. But every time, I remembered the kindness that once saved me, and I chose to keep moving. Joe's eyes glistened. He wasn't a man who showed emotion easily, but Keanu's honesty was pulling something raw out of him. You're saying, Joe whispered, that resilience isn't about never falling, it's about rising after every fall. Exactly, Keanu said, his voice calm, but filled with conviction. Resilience is standing up even when the ground beneath you is shaking. Resilience is choosing love over bitterness, again and again. That is what keeps me alive. And in that moment, viewers watching felt their own wounds being acknowledged. It was as if Keanu wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for every person who had ever faced heartbreak, loss, or loneliness. But Keanu wasn't finished. He leaned back, his expression darker now, his voice lower. Joe, there is one story I rarely share, because even now it hurts. But maybe tonight is the right time to tell it. Joe's eyes locked onto him, his curiosity and empathy mixing into silence. The audience leaned forward, their hearts pounding, knowing something heavy was coming. The chapter he never spoke off the room felt heavy, almost sacred. Joe Rogan leaned in, his voice softer than usual. If you're ready to share it, we're ready to listen. Keanu exhaled slowly, like a man carrying a stone inside his chest. His eyes shifted downward for a moment, then he lifted them back up, steady, but vulnerable. Years ago, he began, I fell in love with someone who changed my world. She was kind, gentle, and she understood me in a way no one else ever had. For a long time, I thought I had finally found peace. His words carried both warmth and sorrow, and Joe immediately felt the weight of what was coming. We dreamed of building a life together. There were nights when we would sit under the stars, talking about the future, about children, about growing, old side by side. It felt real. It felt like the universe had finally given me something pure after all the pain. Keanu's voice cracked slightly, and he paused to steady himself. Joe's eyes softened. But something happened, didn't it? Keanu nodded. Yes. Life has a way of testing how much we can endure. She became pregnant, and for the first time in my life, I was truly excited for the future. I wanted to be a father, to give my child everything I never had. But then, tragedy came. Our baby was stillborn. I can't describe that pain, Joe. Holding a tiny life that never got to breathe, it broke me. Joe closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening as he processed the gravity of those words. Keanu's hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed calm, as if that wasn't enough. Not long after, I lost her too. An accident took her away from me. One day, we were planning our life, and the next, I was standing alone, staring at the emptiness she left behind. There are no words for that kind of grief. You don't move past it. You learn to live with it. The studio fell into complete silence. The pain in his story reached through the screen, gripping every viewer who had ever known loss. Joe, finally, spoke, his voice almost a whisper. How did you survive that? Keanu looked at him with eyes that carried both suffering and wisdom. I survived because I had no choice. Grief doesn't ask for permission, it becomes part of you. I realized I could either let it destroy me, or I could let it teach me, so I chose to live for the ones I lost. Every act of kindness I give, every moment of patience, every smile I share, it is my way of honoring them. I carry their memory in how I live, not in how I suffer. Joe's throat tightened, and his usual tough, comedic energy faded into something tender. That's one of the most powerful things I've ever heard. Keanu nodded. Pain changes us, but it doesn't have to make us bitter. It can make us softer, more understanding. It can give us the strength to see other people's struggles, even when they don't say a word. That's why I always try to be kind, because I know how much a small kindness can save someone, even if just for a moment. The audience watching felt their hearts ache. It wasn't just a story about an actor. It was a story about loss, resilience, and the choice to keep love alive, despite everything. Joe leaned closer, his voice steady, but emotional. So, after all that, after losing so much, how do you still believe in love? How do you still have hope? Keanu's lips curved into a small, fragile smile. Because love never really dies, Joe. It changes form. It lives in memories, in kindness, in silence, and in every chance we have to help another soul. I believe hope is not about expecting life to be easy. It's about choosing to see the light, even when darkness surrounds you. And with those words, the studio felt transformed. Joe wasn't just interviewing a guest. He was witnessing a human spirit, refusing to break. Even after being shattered again and again. The weight of kindness. Joe Rogan sat quietly, almost forgetting he was the host. He had interviewed hundreds of people, but rarely did he feel like the one being taught. Keanu Reeves was not just telling a story, he was peeling back the layers of his soul. Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes reflecting both pain and gentleness. After losing so much, I began to notice things others ignored. I saw people rushing through life, chasing success, chasing money, chasing recognition. But what they often missed was each other. They missed the chance to really see people. He paused, then added softly, "And Joe, I know what it feels like to be unseen. I know what it feels like when people walk past your pain because they are too busy. I promised myself that I would never be that kind of person. So even in the middle of Hollywood, with all its lights and noise, I try to be present. I try to listen. Because sometimes, listening is the greatest kindness we can give." Joe nodded, his voice low. "And I think that's why people respect you so much. You're not just a star, you're a human who chooses humility." Keanu smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "Respect is not something you demand. It's something you earn by how you treat others." I've met people who had nothing, no fame, no fortune, but they carried more dignity and grace than the richest person in a mansion. Those people taught me more than any award or red carpet ever could. He leaned forward, his tone deepening. I remember once, I was on a subway. No cameras, no interviews, just an ordinary day. An older woman stepped in, holding heavy bags. I saw her struggling to stand, so I gave her my seat. It was nothing extraordinary, but the way she looked at me, with gratitude, with relief, it reminded me that kindness, no matter how small, can mean the world to someone. Joe chuckled softly, and the funny part is, the internet exploded when that story got out. Everyone was shocked, like it was some huge thing. But really, you were just being decent. Keanu nodded. Yes, that's the sad part, Joe. Basic kindness has become so rare that when it appears, people treat it like a miracle. But it shouldn't be rare. It should be the foundation of how we live. If my stories, or my actions, remind people to be kind, then maybe that's the only legacy I need. His words hung in the air, striking something deep in the audience. Joe leaned in, curiosity pulling him forward. But here's something I wonder. When you give so much of yourself, when you carry that much pain, but still choose to be kind, doesn't it ever feel heavy? Don't you ever feel like the world takes more than it gives back? Keanu's expression grew thoughtful. He paused before answering, as if weighing every word. Yes, Joe, it feels heavy. There are days when I am exhausted, days when I question the point of it all. But then, something small happens. A stranger smiles. A child laughs. Someone shows me kindness when I least expect it. And in those moments, I remember why I keep going. The weight of kindness is real, but it is lighter than the weight of regret. Joe leaned back, stunned at the depth of the answer. Keanu continued, his voice quieter now, almost like he was speaking directly to the souls of those listening. The truth is, we don't get to choose everything that happens to us. We don't get to choose our losses, our pain, or the way life surprises us with tragedy. But we do get to choose how we respond. And for me, I choose to carry kindness. Because in the end, no one remembers how much money you made, but they always remember how you made them feel. The room grew silent once more. Joe rubbed his chin, lost in thought. He had planned to ask questions about movies, martial arts, maybe even fame. But all of that felt meaningless compared to what was unfolding in front of him. Keanu, Joe said quietly, you've shared so much, but let me ask you something personal after all the pain and all the lessons. What do you think life really is about? Keanu looked at him, his eyes deep, his voice steady. Life, Joe, is not about what we keep, it's about what we give. The measure of a life is not in years lived, but in hearts touched. The words struck like thunder. Joe sat frozen, realizing this wasn't just an interview, it was a gift, a reminder, a lesson that every listener needed to hear. The forgotten promise at studio lights seemed softer now, almost as if they too were listening. Joe Rogan leaned closer, his hands folded, his face showing both respect and curiosity. He could feel the conversation moving into a place beyond ordinary interviews, into something rare, something sacred. Keanu took a slow breath before speaking. Joe, when I was younger and still searching for a place in this world, I made myself a promise. It wasn't about becoming famous or rich. It was a simple promise to never let pain turn me into someone unkind. His eyes grew distant, as if replaying memories long buried. There was a man I knew back then. He was older, a family friend. He had gone through terrible losses. He lost his job, his marriage fell apart, and then he lost his son in an accident. The pain changed him. It made him bitter, angry at everyone. He pushed people away until he was completely alone. I watched that happen, and I was scared. I was scared that one day, I might become like him if I let grief control me. Joe's brow furrowed. So you made a promise to yourself not to let that happen. Keanu nodded. Yes, I promised myself that no matter what I lost, I would not lose my ability to care for others. I would not lose compassion. But Joe, keeping that promise has not been easy. There were nights when I almost broke it. He paused, his voice trembling slightly. After I lost the woman I loved, I remember walking through the city one night. I was broken, empty, and I thought to myself, what is the point of going on? I sat on a bench in the cold, and I felt like disappearing. But then something happened. A stranger walked by, and she smiled at me. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I was going through. But that simple smile, it reminded me that there was still light in the world. It was enough to stop me from giving up that night. The audience watching felt their chests tighten. A single smile had saved him. Joe shook his head slowly, amazed. That's incredible, man. A stranger changed everything without even knowing. Keanu's lips curved into a small, humble smile. Yes, and that's why I believe in small acts. You never know when a moment of kindness can save someone's life. It may not make headlines, but it can change a soul. It changed mine. He leaned forward now, his voice lower, carrying a sense of urgency. And Joe, this is the lesson I want people to remember. Life is not about waiting for some grand miracle. Sometimes, the miracle is as simple as holding the door for someone, listening without judgment, or offering a smile. We all have the power to give that gift. We all have the power to save someone, even when we don't realize it. Joe sat back, speechless for a moment. Then he finally said, so the forgotten promise you made back then, that's what still guides you today? Keanu nodded firmly. Yes, I carry it everywhere. I know pain will visit me again. I know. Loss is not finished with me. But as long as I remember that promise, I will not let the world harden my heart. I will not let suffering steal my humanity. The words hit Joe like a wave. He had spent years talking about discipline, strength, and survival. But here was a man showing him that the greatest discipline of all might be choosing kindness when bitterness feels easier. The silence after Keanu's words was heavy, yet it felt alive. Everyone in the room knew they were hearing something unforgettable. And then, Keanu leaned back and looked straight at Joe with calm eyes. But there is something else, Joe. Something I've never shared publicly before. It's not just about what I lost, it's about what I found in the middle of that darkness. Joe leaned forward, his curiosity igniting once more. What did you find? What he found in the dark, Joe? Rogan leaned closer, his voice steady, but filled with anticipation. So what did you find, Keanu? After all that pain, after all that loss, what was left for you? Keanu's eyes softened, and a silence stretched. In the room before he answered, I found myself, Joe. I found the part of me that doesn't depend on success, on money, or even on love from others. I found the part of me that simply exists to give, to listen, and to keep moving forward. His voice grew quieter, but every word carried weight. When I lost everything, I realized that the world could strip me of family, of love, of comfort, but it could not strip me of choice. I still had the choice to be kind. I still had the choice to live with dignity. And that is when I understood something I had never truly seen before. Life is not measured by what you hold, but by what you release. Joe tilted his head, intrigued. What do you mean by what you release? Keanu smiled faintly. We carry so much anger, regret, fear, grudges. We think holding on will protect us, but it only poisons us. The moment I began to let go of those weights, I felt free. Not free from grief, because grief will always walk beside me, but free from becoming a prisoner to it. I found peace in release. The audience listening felt the truth pressing into their hearts. Many of them carried their own invisible weights, and Keanu's words gave them permission to let go. Joe nodded slowly. So letting go is where the strength comes from. Yes, Keanu replied firmly. Strength is not clinging to everything. Strength is knowing when to let go and still keep your heart open. I learned that love does not disappear, it changes form. Sometimes love becomes memory. Sometimes it becomes a lesson. And sometimes it becomes the fuel that pushes you to be better, kinder, stronger than before. Joe leaned back, exhaling deeply, his eyes fixed on Keanu. Man, you're teaching me more in 1 hour than I've learned in years. Keanu's voice grew even softer, almost like a whisper. And Joe, there is something else. Something I realized in those darkest nights. I realized that pain connects us more than joy. Everyone understands loss. Everyone understands loneliness. When we share our wounds, we create bridges. Those bridges can heal not just us, but the people who walk across them. The studio fell into stillness again, the kind of stillness where no one dares to move. That's why, Keanu continued, I don't hide my scars. I let people see them, because maybe, when they see my scars, they'll realize they're not alone in theirs. And if even one person feels less alone because I spoke, then all of my pain has meaning. Joe shook his head slowly, a small smile breaking across his face. You know what, Keanu? I thought this was going to be a conversation about movies and martial arts. But what you've given us tonight, it's something much bigger. It's something people will carry with them. Keanu's eyes glistened, but his voice remained calm. That's all I want, Joe. Not to be remembered as an actor, but as someone who reminded people that kindness is still possible, even in the middle of suffering. The audience watching felt their throats tighten, their eyes wet. This was no longer entertainment. It was a life lesson wrapped in honesty, delivered with humility. Joe leaned forward, his voice trembling slightly now. Keanu, one last question before we close this. If you had one message to leave behind for the world, one truth that sums up your journey, what would it be? Keanu looked at him, his face steady, his eyes shining with depth. Joe, that message is simple, but it took me a lifetime to understand. And tonight, I want to share it. The Final Truth studio felt like a sacred space. Now, Joe Rogan leaned in, his hands pressed together as if he was about to pray. The audience watching could feel their hearts pounding. Keanu Reeves was about to reveal something that carried the weight of his entire life. Keanu took a long breath, his eyes softened, not with weakness, but with quiet strength. Joe, if there is one truth I want to leave behind, it is this. Life is short, fragile, and unpredictable. But within that fragility lies the chance to create meaning. Every small act of kindness, every moment of love, every time we choose compassion over anger, those are the things that last. He paused, and his voice dropped lower, almost like a whisper that carried more power than any shout. The world will not remember the cars you drove, or the houses you lived in. It will remember the lives you touched, the hearts you healed, and the souls you lifted when they were falling. That, Joe, is what life is about. Joe swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. So, you're saying? Legacy isn't about what you achieve. It's about how you make others feel. Keanu nodded. Yes. Legacy is kindness. Legacy is respect. Legacy is resilience. If the only thing people remember about me is that I tried to treat them with dignity, then I've lived a good life. The silence that followed was powerful. It wasn't empty, it was full, overflowing with reflection, grief, and hope all at once. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Joe's. I want people to know that pain will come, loss will come, but so will love, so will kindness, so will moments of beauty you never expected, and those moments are worth holding on to. No matter how dark it gets, never stop looking for the light. And if you can't find it, be the light. Joe exhaled deeply, shaking his head in awe. That might be the most important thing anyone has ever said on this show. Keanu smiled, a gentle smile that carried both sorrow and peace. It's not just words, Joe. It's how I live. Every day, I try to remember that the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more kindness. That's the truth I carry. And if my story helps even one person choose kindness, then everything I went through has meaning. The studio audience, though invisible to the cameras, felt united in the same emotion. The weight of his honesty wrapped around everyone. For some, it brought healing. For others, it brought tears. For all, it brought hope. Joe sat back, still stunned, and finally whispered, "Thank you, Keanu. Thank you for opening up. You didn't just give us a story, you gave us a gift." Keanu nodded, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you for listening. Sometimes, listening is the greatest kindness of all." And with that, the conversation ended not with applause, not with laughter, but with silence. A silence that wasn't empty, but alive. A silence filled with lessons that would stay with every person who heard them.